Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. This webinar is the third in a series of webinars that NASEO is hosting on clean hydrogen topics as part of the state Clean Hydrogen Initiative. And this month, we're focusing on workforce and economic development opportunities in the clean hydrogen space. So before we get started, if we could move to the next slide, I just want to flag a few Zoom reminders. We are recording this webinar and we'll be posting it on NASEO's website. And we'll also share slides with attendees afterwards in case you want to review. If you do have comments, please put them in the Q&A. And we will reserve the last 15 minutes for an open discussion with the panelists. So feel free to raise your hand and unmute or post your question in the Q&A and we'll read it out loud. And I think this is a webinar format, so we don't have to worry about unmuting, but if you've asked your question and you can put yourself back on mute so that we can hear all the speakers. And with those logistics out of the way, I just want to introduce our speakers for today. If we could move to the next slide, thanks. So we're really grateful to Stephanie, Tom, and Alan for joining us today for sharing their insights on clean hydrogen workforce development. And each of them has a very unique perspective to share. So first we'll hear from Stephanie Selt, who is a senior energy policy specialist at the Washington State Department of Commerce, the Energy Office. And next we'll turn it over to Dr. Thomas Krieger, Director of Education and Research at North America's Building Trades Unions, or NABTU. And then finally, we'll hear from Alan Rossiter, who is the Executive Director of External Relations and Educational Program Development at UH Energy at the University of Houston, which is home to the Hydrogen Economy Program. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Stephanie to kick us off.
Awesome. Thank you, Grace. Can you hear me okay? Okay, wonderful. Hello, everyone. Thanks very much for the opportunity to speak here. I'm at a conference right now, so I'm hoping that the hotel Wi-Fi works well enough for you all to hear me, but fingers crossed. Very excited to share some perspectives to kind of kick us off about hydrogen workforce and how we are thinking about it from the state agency perspective in Washington State. Specifically, I work in our policy team at our state energy office located in the Washington State Department of Commerce, and going to reflect a little bit on some of the opportunities that we're hoping to be responding to out of some of the federal funding opportunities and where we see workforce considerations coming up, and also some state policy and sort of state coalition building efforts. And I will just begin by saying I'm really excited about the way in which this opportunity is becoming just more prominent to be seeing a focus in different states and at the federal level on how we create and support good jobs in our clean energy economy and clean energy efforts. I spent about 5 years at the Washington State Blue-Green Alliance, which is a partnership between labor unions and environmental groups and community organizations. And there was a strong focus on, how we maximize our benefits to people in terms of both workforce, human health, and other kind of human considerations in how we tackle our environmental challenges. So it's really gratifying and welcome to see so much of that being coming down kind of from on high at the federal level right now, and just a lot of other folks who are really recognizing how important it is to have these conversations together. So with that, I think next slide, please. So the Washington State Department of Commerce is an agency in Washington that has a lot of different kinds of programs, and I work within our state energy office, as I mentioned. Next slide. And one of the things that Commerce's energy office does is we have the opportunity to publish our state energy strategy every 10 years. So our most recent one came out in 2021, and we include in that state energy strategy a number of different pathways to consider as we think about how we are going to fulfill our requirements to deliver clean and affordable energy to all communities in Washington state, and also meet our greenhouse gas reduction and climate action goals across the state. Next slide, please. So in the state energy strategy, the most recent one, we saw some important roles for green hydrogen highlighted in that document. And green hydrogen is the term that we use in the state, or we also use green electrolytic and renewable hydrogen, which I can speak to if anyone is interested. So it's slightly different than the clean hydrogen language that we see coming out of the federal government, but mostly aligned. And the three main places where we see green hydrogen having an important role to play as we implement our state energy strategy are in the categories of power and helping to provide flexible load in terms of especially renewable generation in our power system and opportunities around storage. Also in transportation, especially for replacing conventional fuels used in maritime aviation and heavy duty trucking in particular. And then in industrial processes, so replacing the fossil derived or gray hydrogen that we use as industrial feedstocks today, and potentially as replacements for fuels that are being combusted for high temperature processes. So those are pretty aligned with some of the end uses that we're seeing highlighted by the federal government as well. And just, we're thinking about how much of the economy those areas alone touch. And of course, hydrogen may be used in other places, but those are some of the ones that we called out. Next slide, please. We did some updated modeling a few months ago, and I just think it's useful to get a little bit more color about what specific parts of the economy we see hydrogen beginning to ramp up and play a role in over time. So again, I mentioned our energy strategy looks at a number of different scenarios that may play out as we implement the strategy. This one is our electrification strategy, which is the one that is probably highlighted the most in that document. And in that scenario, you can really see in this slide, the kind of red slice in the on the far left is where we use hydrogen today. Again, it's mostly for chemical production in those industrial feedstocks. But once you get to 2030, 2035, we're anticipating seeing a lot of uptick in different kinds of trucking, domestic and international shipping, continued use, though smaller, in petroleum refining, and then growth also in areas like industrial heat. So it just gives you a little bit more sense of all of the different workforces that are potentially impacted and more. Next slide, please. Just wanted to highlight for those who haven't had a chance to look yet, the Department of Energy recently put out their draft clean hydrogen strategy. And among many other things, it's a great document. It's really worth a read. Among other things in the document, they highlight 8 guiding principles that should be adhered to in the development of clean hydrogen production, transportation, and use. So all of our kind of hydrogen deployment. And there's a number of these that connect to workforce, but I just highlighted one of them here, growing sustainable jobs, and pulled out some text around how DOE is really looking at preserving and growing sustainable jobs. They talk about good paying union jobs and thinking about opportunities for communities and workers that are transitioning from more fossil fuel dependent communities. Where are the ways in which we can be expanding kind of training programs, apprenticeship programs, and other workforce development opportunities. So it's just, again, great to see the federal government talking about this as an important cornerstone of hydrogen deployment, and really leading the way with some nuance about what that should look like, which we're excited to see. Next slide, please. In terms of the Regional Clean Hydrogen Hubs program too, and again, people may be familiar with this, but just to reiterate, it's really important that we also see workforce considerations front and center in that funding program that's coming online and is going to be financing 6 to 10 hydrogen hubs around the country. And one of the things that is really strongly focused on and is going to be a prominent scoring criteria when hub proposals are coming into DOE is what they've called a community benefits plan. And every hydrogen hub proposal needs to develop one and address community and labor engagement in the development of hydrogen projects. That point number 2 about investing in America's workforce is another kind of really important one where there's a lot of nuance around the kinds of agreements and protections that should be in place as we invest in these new hydrogen projects, and really kind of making it clear that it matters, the kinds of employers that are partnering in these projects and the ways in which local workers and prevailing wages and other tools are being used. So, as well as really connecting to diversity, equity, inclusion, and the Justice 40 initiative. Next slide. In Washington State, some of the workforce questions that we are digging into right now are really around how these different opportunities related to the Hydrogen Hubs program, related to the federal hydrogen strategy and roadmap, related to our own state policies. And we're going to be working on a report and recommendations around hydrogen deployment in the state. So making sure that we are beginning all of that work, asking the right questions about workforce and connecting the hydrogen workforce opportunities to some of the other related workforce efforts and considerations happening in Washington State right now. So we need to begin by identifying who and where are the current hydrogen workers, those who are already involved in some form of hydrogen production and use. We need to be thinking about where hydrogen jobs can utilize existing workforces and skill sets. So thinking about those slices of that graph that really take off in 2030, 2035, those don't necessarily need to all be new workers. They can they very much may and probably should be utilizing our current trained workforce, as well as bringing new people into the workforce, and thinking about where there's connections from skills that are being used today, not directly connected to hydrogen, but where they could become part of that workforce. And then what additional skills or sectors are needed? Where are those gaps? We need to think about that across all sectors. So it's not just the production of hydrogen, but there are a lot of logistics and considerations across the supply chain, including transportation, storage, and all of those different end uses where hydrogen is going to play an important role. We need to think about what steps we need to be taking between now and 2030, because again, that was when most of those end uses we're anticipating taking off. We've got a little bit of runway, and we need to do the thinking and planning now to get ready for those changes. And then it's really important to think about what kinds of workforce shifts are kind of expected to play out during this time period. And one of the things that has been an interesting conversation that we have begun with some of the labor unions in Washington State are thinking about conversations about, hydrogen production and transportation, thinking about pipelines and some of the, again, kind of the shared skill sets for those who are maybe working with natural gas pipelines today. We've heard some of our unions starting to see some connections there for their workers in the hydrogen economy to come. And I think we also then need to be thinking about what's going to look different as well, right? So at the moment, natural gas is extremely distributed. We have natural gas connections in so many of our homes and businesses, whereas hydrogen may be more of a centralized effort, and maybe not going into our residential homes, but more in larger quantities to certain industrial uses or fueling stations. So where are those jobs actually going to be? Where are the pipelines or trucking routes or whatever else? So that we are not thinking just about the skills, but actually the changes in how the work is going to play out and where it's going to be located. Next slide, please. So just some examples of some legislation in Washington State where we have already been trying to incentivize good jobs in our clean energy efforts. Most of the model in Washington State was set through our Clean Energy Transformation Act, which is moving Washington State towards 100% clean electricity by 2045. And we included in that policy tax incentives that increase in value according to adherence to different kinds of labor standards and labor and community tools, such as prevailing wages, community workforce agreements, and project labor agreements, as well as having important equity provisions around benefiting disadvantaged communities. So that was something we passed into law in 2019. And just this year in 2021, we passed a bill called HB 1988, which is related to providing incentives and tax deferrals for clean energy manufacturing projects, which includes clean fuels and green hydrogen. And those tax incentives for using higher labor standards was included in that bill as well. So we have some statute now that is going to really be providing those strong financial incentives for hydrogen production and hydrogen manufacturing projects, which could also include electrolyzers and kind of hydrogen-related equipment that we're really encouraging at the state level that good local jobs are part of what we hope to see. Next slide, please. And then just, I think this is maybe my last slide or maybe second to last. It's important to have workers and unions at the table as we're trying to identify these workforce pathways that we want to go down. And so in Washington State, along with Oregon, the work that is going towards pursuit of a Clean Hydrogen Hubs grant is through an organization that was set up last year or earlier this year called the Pacific Northwest Hydrogen Association. And right off the bat, we at Commerce and the governor's office and some of the other stakeholders that had been asked through legislative action to help set this up, we knew that it was important to have a diverse array of voices at the table, including unions and workforce development organizations. So both on that association's board and in the numerous advisory committees, there are labor leaders who are at the table, who are the ones that are going to be driving this work forward, defining the shape, helping to craft and finalize our community benefits plan. So it's not being done and then kind of by a group disconnected from workforce, right? Those voices are right at the table, and we know that that's the best way to approach this kind of major energy economy changing and shaping types of work. And then that will also be complemented by regional community and labor engagement as those project proposals are finalized. Next slide. And I think I'm 1 minute over, so I will just be quick here, but there are also other local opportunities that I just wanted to briefly highlight. Commerce helps to fund industry cluster organizations, and we have one by the name of Charge, which brings together different stakeholders in hydrogen related industries. We also have centers of excellence in Washington State, and our Center of Excellence for Clean Energy has a strong hydrogen focus at the moment. And the director of that center is also now co-chairing a global hydrogen academia work group. So they're really thinking about the kinds of training that is going to be needing to be developed over time, and also exploring opportunities related to renewable energy vehicles and some of the jobs that may be developing related to hydrogen vehicles, as well as other EVs. We have still our Blue-Green Alliance, where labor and environmental partners are working together, as well as lots of interest from tribal nations in the state and the region. about workforce opportunities related to the hydrogen economy for tribal members. And we're going to be doing a statewide assessment around clean energy jobs with a number of different state agencies in Washington, and hydrogen is going to be one part of that. So part of where we can start to answer some of those questions I was highlighting before. And then just this last piece here is around innovative workforce visions are what we're hoping to see as we move forward with our hydrogen economy and our hydrogen workforce. And I just put up a screenshot of a proposal for a hydrogen production facility in the town of Centralia, which is the site of our last coal-fired power plant that's scheduled to shut down in 2025. And they're the company that's interested in hydrogen production is looking at hiring all of the workers who are currently working in that power plant and kind of bringing them from the coal energy economy into a hydrogen economy in a really coordinated way. This all remains to be seen, but that's part of the vision that's being developed and built with lots of different stakeholders. And I think if done well, that's the kind of opportunity that we think could be really valuable, and that community in particular would be really interested to have some of that economic development and revitalization. So lots of opportunities here. I'll leave it there for the other speakers, but thank you very much.
Great, thanks so much, Stephanie. And now I'll turn it over to Tom.
All right, thank you, Grace. And first, let me thank NASEO for giving NABTU the opportunity to present today. I have 3 topics, and I'll go through them rather briskly. The one I want to talk about our training model, because we are at the, right now, integrating hydrogen and clean or green hydrogen, whatever your preference is, training into our apprenticeship program. So I thought I would spend a few minutes, couple of minutes, maybe 5 minutes explaining the apprenticeship program, and then also talk about apprenticeship readiness. And then I'll give you some specific examples of how hydrogen is being integrated into our registered apprenticeship model. So if I could have the next slide, please. So who is NABTU? What are we? North America's Building Trades Unions. I'm the Director of Research and Education for NABTU. We are a labor organization in Washington, D.C. that represents 15 of the building and construction trades units, 14, I'm sorry, of the building and construction trades in the United States. There's a list of them all there. And we, it's a huge industry. We have about 3 million members in our 14 affiliated unions. And we tend to work in more complicated types of construction where training really is the, the watchword in those industries. So industrial, commercial, educational sectors. We tend not to do residential construction today for a variety of reasons. Next slide. So how do our registered apprenticeship programs work in the construction industry? We did a survey since I put these slides together a couple of weeks ago, and that 200,000 number is actually 280,000. In 2022, the highest number of apprentices we had across all 15 of the building trade unions was close to 300,000, which means that the majority of apprentices in the United States in all industries are still trained in the construction industry. Those 15 unions, it's in our apprenticeship program, what we've been very proud of over the years, that it's self-funded. It's all private money. There's no taxpayer money in there. And it's close to $2 billion annually. And that's the combined training budgets of all of the 15 building and construction trades unions. And we'll talk about the signatory contractors, our contractor partners, in just a moment. It's a huge system. It's one of the largest privately funded education systems in the United States. We have 1,600 training centers in the United States. If you add the carpenters, we're not affiliated with the carpenters nationally, but that gets up to about 1,800 training centers. We have 20,000 trained instructors across the industry. We really think this is the best training in the construction industry based on that, very large private sector investment. Next slide. So how do these programs work? And this is one of the common misconceptions, I think, about the union construction industry. And we get sloppy and we call them union training programs. They're really joint management programs. At the heart of our training regime, in those 1,650 training centers, are what are called JATCs, or Joint Labor Management Training Committees, or Joint Apprentice Training Committees. So how this works is through collective bargaining. Every plumber, every steam fitter, every electrician, and on down the line for all of our trades and subtrades, they contribute some portion of their hourly pay into a training fund. And that's all set by, it's done through collective bargaining by contract. The group that oversees that training fund is not just members of unions, it's also the signatory contractors that sit across the table from us. And this is a model of labor relations in the United States that you don't often hear in the press. You often hear about strikes and things with the auto workers and all of that. And we do have disagreements, to be sure, with our employers. But our labor relations in the construction industry rests on an almost $2 billion joint commitment, a joint labor management commitment on training. So that the training fund, when those funds are dispersed to the training center, there's an equal number of employers or contractors that dictates or has a say in how that money goes, and union people as well. Our folks, the labor folks, tend to do the teaching and the organization of the training center and that. And the curriculum tends to be driven by our employers, because they know what kind of skills they need in their workforce in order for them to successfully bid work. And I go through all of this because this is important in relation to hydrogen, because we are now working with, and have been working for a number of years, but we will be working more in the future, particularly with the funding that comes from the Biden administration, which has been the most pro-construction and pro-labor administration in many, many years, is that there's opportunities now, and we're working with a whole new set of employers in the hydrogen space, and that the many different uses of hydrogen will be integrated into our training system because those employers sit at the table with us. So this is just a snapshot of what is called the JATC system, and this is replicated at all of our training centers. It's joint labor management decisions on what kind of training, how many people are trained, and all of that. Next slide, please. So how these registered apprenticeship programs work. Each trade, as you can imagine, operates its own registered apprenticeship program. They vary. The non-mechanical trades are 3 to 4 years. The mechanical trades are 4 to 5 years, depending on the trades. And this again, so when you become an apprentice in the building trades, you have a full-time job. You go to work full-time and you get dispatched out of your union local to a number of different projects. If you might do work a project for one day, you may be there for a couple of years, but you're going to be working for multiple employers over that time, and you will be supervised on the job. 90% of what you do as a construction apprentice, or the training, takes place on the job. The rest of it takes place, it's called related technical instruction, takes place in the classroom. That's the 3 to 5 year part. So for somebody, an electrician, for example, they will work with full benefits for 5 years. And they also will be going to school through that whole 5 years. There's no cost to the apprentice. We are the only industry that we know about where the current generation of workers pays for the training for the next generation of workers. And then they become what's called a journey worker. And in the licensed crafts, plumbers and electricians, they will also have to sit for state licensure. Next slide, please. So this is an earn while you learn model. And it has high requirements to get in. You have to have reliable transportation. We generally don't take anybody without a GED or a high school diploma. You have to pass a drug test to get into our programs. And the reason we have those high expectations is the very good pay. I mean, it's not uncommon for people to come out of our apprenticeship programs 3 to 5 years, even out of high school, and be making $75,000, $80,000 a year with full benefits. Through the life of their apprenticeship program, they make graduated wages. You start at 50 or 60% of the journey worker's wage, and as long as you progress and pass your tests and things and work through the program successfully, your wages go up automatically every 6 months. Next slide, please. So and I wanted to mention this, I'll do this very briefly. We have a history, and we acknowledge it in the construction industry, that has been exclusionary over the years. But, as our president, Sean McGarvey, says in every speech he makes these days, This is not your grandfather's building trades. And over the last 15 to 20 years, the building trades have made a huge commitment to building a diversified pipeline of apprentices that are coming into all of our trades, women, people of color, the justice involved Native Americans. And we have programs to do that. They're called apprenticeship readiness programs. This is also the largest pre-apprenticeship program in any industry in the United States. Just over the last 5 years, we've had 15,000 people successfully complete. We have a curriculum, a turnkey curriculum that we license to programs around the country. 200 programs teach that curriculum. And of those 15,000 graduates, approximately 80% of them are people of color, and between 20 and 25% of them are women, which is much higher than our national average. Our national average is just, we've had a lot of growth in women in construction the last couple of years, but we're still at 4% of craft workers are female, and that's something we're working very, very hard to adjust. Next slide. This is the curriculum. I won't go there, but this is the curriculum for our pre-apprenticeship, or what we call apprenticeship readiness programs. Notice green construction is in there. It is an elective. In some states, it is mandatory, as in California. I think probably within a year, that will be mandatory around the country as we move more into the green energy sectors. Next slide. So how do our ARPs work? It's a real sea change for the building trades. Our local building trades councils, we have elected representatives in community all around the country. They work with community-based organizations. We work with the United Way, National Urban League, Goodwill Industries, Catholic Charities, the NAACP, to recruit a more diverse pipeline of people into the building trades. And you see those statistics there at the bottom that we're very proud of, that this is a diversity initiative, DEIA initiative in the building trades, and we are hitting our marks there. Next slide. So how does this, to finish then, we've talked about our joint labor management apprenticeship model. And the reason I raised that is it's very important to understand that our training and our training centers and all that are not union training centers. Our contractors are full partners there at the table with us. We have over 90,000 signatory contractors in all 15 trades across the country. And where that's important is the contractors, our employers, drive new technologies such as hydrogen, and that's how they become, integrated into our training system. And I was talking to the IBEW, with one of their national training directors, in preparation for this meeting, and we started talking about nuclear, and we came across the idea that 60, 70 years ago, just before I was born, there was no nuclear training because there was no nuclear industry. Now, today, preparation and in terms of welding and standards and education and all that is taught through all of our crafts, because sometimes that it's good for workers that they be fully trained to work on nuclear projects. The same thing is happening today in terms of hydrogen. Now, the electrical workers, and I'm going to give you 2 examples here just to finish. The electrical workers developed a curriculum in clean hydrogen over 10 years ago. They were very early adopters. The problem with is apprenticeship in our industry is very much demand driven. Unless you have projects for those apprentices to go to work in the hydrogen space, they're not going to put those skills to use. So we've had this training available, but we've had a lack of industry demand. That's why we were so optimistic about the work of the Biden administration to provide federal funding to expand hydrogen production, construction, and generation, because that will provide more opportunities for our apprentices. For the electrical workers, it's part of what they call a distributed generation curriculum. They learn the technologies to go to work in solar and wind. They learn the technologies and the materials and the processes to go to work in hydrogen. It's important in our industries that we broadly train people, because it's good for the workers. It gives them more opportunities. If they are narrowly trained only in one type of energy, solar installers, for example, then that's the only job you can do. It's going to limit them. It's going to limit their job and career and family prospects in our industry. So we think broad training and apprenticeship is one of the hallmarks of our registered apprenticeship system. As I said, the same example of what's happening in nascent stages now in our training systems for hydrogen happened in, in nuclear energy generation 60 years ago. Now that's part of, it's baked into the cake of our training system. And then the last slide. The other example is the UA, the United Association of Plumbers and Pipe Fitters. They are more currently developing, and just in recent years are developing their hydrogen training curriculum. Their apprentices are also broadly trained to work in all forms of clean energy. There is an industry association called IAPMO, the International Association of Plumbing and Maintenance Officers. And they developed just this year, this industry group working with labor and management sitting down together, new hydrogen standards for training. Those were just developed in March of 2022. So UA members, they're working today on gas-powered turbines for power generation and the pipelines that connect them. That's one of the things that they're doing now. Those apprentices that are trained are receiving that hydrogen training, as all of them are going to work on those projects. And, the one thing that the president of the UA, Mark McManus, pointed out in an editorial that I drew upon for this presentation is, for some sources of clean energy, typical of wind and solar, they employ much shorter, smaller numbers of people and smaller numbers of crafts. That's where hydrogen is much more, in terms of its production and the plants and things, much more complicated. And that's where, high levels of training are very important. And that's important to us because we're going to employ our members. And I just will leave you with this. I was very happy to hear Stephanie talk about workforce. What was the term? Workforce benefits is important there in the state of Washington. It's really important for us because, as everybody knows, we have a lot of people that work in oil and gas. Those people are going to transition, and we want them to have the same standards, the same workplace standards, the same lifestyle, and the same earning potential as they do in the new green economy. That's why it's essential to have a lot of different crafts and longer duration of these plants, which you see in hydrogen, and also workforce benefits accrue across all of the new clean energy sources, because that will allow our members to maintain their lifestyle, to maintain their earnings, keep their families, keep their kids in college, all those things as we transition to a new green economy. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Tom. And last but not least, I'll turn it over to Alan.
Thanks, Grace, and thanks, Tom and Stephanie, for your nice introduction to my talk. Much appreciated. As you'll see as we go into this, I will touch on a number of the themes that you've already raised, and that's very helpful. So I've titled this The Hydrogen Economy at UH, or the University of Houston, and I call it An Adventure in Micro-Credentials. And as you'll see as I go through these next few slides, it has been something of a journey for us and a fairly recent one. So if you'll move to the next slide, please. So I noticed that Tom had plenty of pieces of data in his presentation. I guess I will lead with just two pieces of data. And the first one was back in 2020, which actually was about the time we started developing micro-credentials in UH Energy, which is my group within the University of Houston. And this data said there were 107,000 OG&C, that means oil, gas, and chemical layoffs in the US in that industry from March to August 2020. Now, of course, if you look at the time frame, that was just as COVID hit, and oil prices actually slumped to below zero briefly at, I guess it was during March of 2020. And that really knocked the industry for quite a hit. And so we saw that data, and that was, as I say, just when we were starting to look at these micro-credential programs, and we thought, well, we need to do something to help those workers who are laid off. What can we do that will still help them out? And then moving forward to earlier this year, there was a report that came out from McKinsey that indicated 188,000 direct or induced jobs just within Texas alone by 2050 because of hydrogen. So those two pieces of data are quite important in framing what I'm going to talk about. Next slide, please. So what conclusions do we draw from this? There's clearly an opportunity for a need, we'll start with, for existing energy workforce participants to find maybe some new direction. And the energy transition has obviously been on its way for a while, but what had happened in 2020 certainly accelerated a lot of things. So energy transition in general provides a way to redirect or to redeploy people who are laid off in the industry. And people are already starting to look for that back in 2020 and even before. But the hydrogen sector, as it has grown in importance and has increasingly appeared in federal grant opportunities, which were already discussed, accelerates that. And also, as I think Stephanie had mentioned specifically, and also Tom, a lot of people are coming into this point with existing skills. They're already working in the energy sector, but those skills are good, but they may also need some new skills. And so our need then was to reskill or upskill people who are at this transition point, maybe in their career, certainly transition in the energy industry. Question is, how do we go about it? So next slide, please. So I want to talk a little bit about micro-credentials, and some of you may be familiar with these, some not. So I've got a couple of sort of more or less textbook definitions here. Micro-credentials are certifications of mastery of specific tasks or specific areas or skill sets. And the key thing here is you're not talking about learning everything from scratch. You're just talking about very specific skill sets, not taking a year to learn them, probably very short timeframes, maybe just a day or two in some cases. So to earn a micro-credential, learners need to complete a certain number of activities, assessments, or projects related to a topic. And then very closely related to micro-credentials are what are called digital badges. And digital badges are described here as a validated indicator of accomplishment or skill that can be earned in various learning environments, but often related to micro-credentials. So you complete your micro-credential. How is that indicated? Well, you don't get a conventional certificate. You might get a digital badge that validates the fact that you've completed this upskilling through a micro-credential in a specific area. And we'll come a bit further on this a bit later, but the digital badges are not just a little sticker that you put on your screen. There's something behind that little sticker, and I'll show you some examples in a minute. The something behind it is really a digital transcript. So you can basically demonstrate your mastery of these limited skill sets, these upgrades that you've done in your studies on digital platforms. And I guess LinkedIn is the one we mostly talk about, but on other digital platforms as well. Next slide, please. So micro-credentials have been around for about 10 years, maybe a bit more, and especially in the IT area. In fact, IBM seems to have been one of the real leaders in this in the early days. And they basically used them for short modules, for targeted training needs like upskilling or reskilling their customer service people when there's a new software rollout, for example. So there would be tests to demonstrate you've mastered the skills. And then once you've done that, you get your digital badge that demonstrates that you have been upskilled, you've been taught in this area, and you've learned it to a level of proficiency. And over time, this concept of digital badges and micro-credentials has been taken up by many companies and colleges, universities, and of course, University of Houston is right up there among that group. Next slide, please. So you may have been asking, when is this guy actually going to give us some graphics? Well, here they are. This is just a sampling of what our digital badges look like. And you'll see here there are some badges and some belts in this screen, and I'll talk a little bit about that. Most of our micro-credential programs are structured in 3 segments. And each segment is roughly 15 contact hours with associated testing. And so most of our micro-credentials, but not all, are structured so that each time you complete one of those 15 contact hour units, you'll get a badge. And when you've got all 3 badges, well, then you get a belt. So you'll see on the screen, I've got a couple of belts shown here and a few badges, but these represent the 5 main programs that we've been running. There are a few others as well, but the main ones, the first 2 we started with, were sustainable energy development, which we called a bronze belt. There were actually 3 badges that you'd have had to get the bronze belt. We also started a program in upstream energy data analytics, and those were our first programs in middle of 2020. Subsequent to that, we developed a silver belt in sustainable energy development, but that was specifically in the hydrogen economy. That then was the hydrogen economy silver belt, also 3 badges to get your belt. And that's really what the core of this particular presentation is about, of course, the hydrogen economy. We also have an ESG belt, or actually 3 badges, but no belt in that case. And we also have data analytics for the process industry. So those are the 5 main programs that we've been running. Next slide, please. Our overall philosophy, these badges are stackable, and the most obvious stacking is what I mentioned before: 3 badges equals a belt. So you get your stack of badges and we give you a belt to go with that. And there are other ways you can stack them, but that's been the most common one. We recognize that we need to get people ready for industrial positions, not just academic training. So we want to make sure that we provide very practical, real-world applications. And to do that, we've done co-teaching with some faculty from the UH and some people from outside in industry. I sort of treat myself as a crossover creature because I actually spent most of my career in industry as a chemical engineer. So I sort of do some academic and some industry-related stuff here. We have rigorous evaluation. You have to do more than just turn up. You have to actually complete tests to get your badges and belts. And one other point, which I'll come back to in a minute, is our program, especially in hydrogen economy, but really in all of them, the programs are very interdisciplinary. Next slide, please. As far as delivery modes, as I mentioned, we started all of this right in the depths of the pandemic. So at that point, everything we were doing in the micro-credential world was virtual. As things have improved, we've been able to do some hybrid activities in some of the programs, and we've even had 1 or 2 entirely in-person micro-credential programs as well. Next slide. Okay, I mentioned that interdisciplinary is important. And if you think about this whole area of energy transition, sustainable energy development, and the hydrogen economy itself, it's all about climate change, right? Everyone is concerned that the climate is changing, greenhouse gas emissions, all of this sort of thing. So energy transition is critical. Otherwise, we're going to sink into climate change. Next slide, please. But then again, actually, it's all about politics. The first thing, well, one of the first things that President Biden did at the start of his term was to call a world summit on climate change. And you'll see all the usual suspects are there. There's Xi Jinping as the first one here on the left in that block there. Sitting next to him is Vladimir Putin, looking rather glum. And Boris Johnson, guess what? He has a bad hair day again. And this is, as I say, pretty much the first thing that President Biden did was to call the people together. And if you look at the quote down below from Boris Johnson, you'll see here he grabs onto the fact that there is a fundamental issue here of growth and jobs. And yes, in one sense, that's a purely political statement, but it's also a policy statement. The issue of climate change, the issue of energy transition, they are very much related to growth and jobs. And again, the previous speakers have highlighted that as well. Next slide, please. Actually, it's all about business. The quote here comes from Larry Fink, and he says, every company and every industry will be transformed by the transition, talking about the energy transition, to a net zero world. So it's energy, it's also around emissions, carbon emissions. The question is, will you lead or will you be led? And you may think, well, who is this guy making statements like that? Larry Fink is CEO of BlackRock. And the data I've got there at the bottom of the screen is a few months out of it, about a year out of date. But back in September 2021, they had nearly 9.5 trillion of assets under management in their portfolio. So when Larry Fink speaks, the business world pays attention. So energy transition, all of this stuff is all about business. Next slide, please. But actually, it's really all about technology. So if you see there, we've got our windmills and our solar farms, obviously a very important part of the energy transition. We have biomass. We also have carbon capture. That's an interesting technology, capture of carbon from the air. And then the picture on the extreme right of that slide brings us to the hydrogen economy. That's a hydrogen fueling station in California. A big part of the energy transition, a big part of the hydrogen economy. Next slide, please. But actually, the case for hydrogen is all about chemistry. I think I mentioned that I'm a chemical engineer, so as you'll understand, I'm contractually obligated to make this statement. But it's true in a sense. Next slide, please. There's no carbon in hydrogen. So when you burn hydrogen, when you use hydrogen, you're not creating any greenhouse gases. And I guess I'd have to say, I wish it were just as simple as that, and we could just give everyone hydrogen and we're done. It ain't quite that simple. But the point is, chemistry is important. But in reality, all perspectives have some validity. And so within our hydrogen economy, especially, the courses have to be interdisciplinary. Next slide, please. And I'm almost at the end, but basically, I just wanted to tell you, give you a few more statistics and also put in perspective what our specific course is dealing with. So we've now completed 3 cohorts of the program. Total number of unique students passing through is 89. So compared to the numbers that Tom was quoting earlier, this is pretty small stuff. We've awarded a total of 252 badges and 69 belts with a completion rate on the badges of 96%. But also, I think it's very important to note the types of learners here. It's been engineers, business planners, executives, and that includes a few, I don't think we've had any CEOs, but we've certainly had a number of vice presidents and the like from a number of companies participating. And a few of our own graduate students from the university. So it's really a sort of management and professional target for this particular program. And so clearly we've got to ask, how can we reach a wider range of people using this approach? Can we provide training to a wider range of potential future clean hydrogen workers who need to transition and need some additional skill sets in order to effectively compete in the hydrogen world? And this is really opening a conversation because I don't really have the answers, but it looks like engaging with universities, community colleges, schools, government agencies, labor unions. All of these are potential partners in this activity, and we're just beginning to explore that within our own world in the universities. And so I think there's one more slide, but it's really just here are my type slides. So I'll close with that and welcome the discussion that is to follow.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for your presentations. It was great to hear from all of you, and lots of overlap, but also different perspectives from each of you. So I think with that, we'll open it up for questions. Feel free to drop any in the Q&A function. It should be at the bottom of your screen, but we do have a few prepared while you think of them. So I'll go ahead with one question for Stephanie. You talked a little bit about the stakeholder engagement process in Washington State, and I'm wondering, in other industries and other sectors of the clean energy economy, what lessons have you learned from that stakeholder engagement and engagement with labor unions that could be relevant for how you're thinking about the hydrogen workforce today?
Yeah, thanks. I think that really what we have learned in Washington is to make sure that there are space for all of these diverse voices at the table to advocate for solutions that work for them, and to do so early, right? And I think we've had many years of different conversations about carbon pricing strategies and clean fuel standards in Washington State. And we've had, different ways in which stakeholders have been engaged in those processes. But I think, have seen a lot of concern, especially from labor unions and partners who felt like they were not able to be at that table, helping to shape the agenda, helping to agree on what questions needed to be answered and what kind of the starting data was as we think about a transition to a clean energy economy and what's required and what the workforce considerations are, and to make sure that they were able to advocate for their own communities and to communicate to environmental stakeholders and businesses and others about the importance of thinking about workforce impacts and the ways in which for the most part these workers want to be part of the solution, but they also want to be able to feed their families and kind of pay their bills, and incorporating that into our way of thinking. And I think for labor and workforce considerations, as well as many other considerations around engagement with different communities, those who are closest to whatever situation you're trying to address are going to be the ones who have the best ideas about what the solutions are that are going to really work. And so I think we're trying to make sure that that is applied in our hydrogen conversations and others. And so that's why I was mentioning in the beginning for like the Pacific Northwest Hydrogen Association, there's less than 20 members of that board, and 3 of them are labor union representatives. So wanting to make sure that those voices and those communities are right there at the table helping to shape the agenda.
Great, thanks, Stephanie. Another question we had was for Tom, and I'm just curious if you could touch on any unique challenges you think your union members are facing or will face when training workers for this new hydrogen economy. I know there's a lot of lessons that could be taken from your established model that's been super successful, but maybe if you could offer a few things you're thinking about or challenges that are specific to the hydrogen economy.
That's a great question. And I have one immediately popped into my head, and it's one that NASEO members can help us with. We have been engaged for, I think, the last 5 or 6 years with the American School Counselors Association, because as you probably, it's probably not a surprise to anybody on this call, school counselors are instructed to send kids to college. And with the decline of vocational education and shop class over the last 30, 40 years in the United States, a lot of kids go through school today. They don't even know we exist. They don't know the building trades exist. And again, this is, where you can come out of high school 3 to 4 years, 3 to 5 years without a college degree and make $75,000, $80,000 with full benefits and more. The economy is doing really well. The construction economy is doing really well. A lot of people are making more with overtime. But we ran into this big roadblock in the schools where school counselors are one of the big gatekeepers in terms of workforce development and career advice, are telling people to go to school, go to college. I went to college. I have a PhD. We don't see anything wrong with going to college intrinsically. We think there's another opportunity and another, which we call the other 4-year degree out there, however. And this is where I think the NASEO members can help us greatly. Go to your local schools, reach out to the school counselor organizations in your states, and make sure that they know that you do presentations and things in the schools where these jobs are here now. There's a lot of good jobs in apprenticeship that are available for your students now. And with the hydrogen, the clean energy economy, they can help save the planet, which the kids are really interested in these days. And they can also make a good living doing it. That's this whole notion of what we call the just economy. So I would say that, getting involved, one of the big challenges we face is recruiting. Because a lot of the parents and a lot of students, the students might be interested, but their parents say, oh no, my fill in the blanks, my son or daughter, they're not going to go into apprenticeship. They're going to go to college. All of our apprenticeship programs have been assessed for higher education credit. So we call apprenticeship the other 4-year degree. You can go, no student debt, earn while you learn. You're making good money. You're getting full benefits. And at the end, you're going to come out with a credential that you can leave the union, start your own business. We like when our members go out and become contractors. You can do that. You can become a safety inspector. You can do anything. And with a whole new industry like hydrogen opening up in construction, there's a huge amount of opportunities. But kids, and this is particularly, I think this is real important. This last thing I'll say is for young girls, is they need to see other women that are working in construction in elementary school, and they need to see images and to hear, hey, this is something you can do. Don't listen to these other people who say, the women don't work in construction. That's baloney. This is a really good job for you. You can support your family by yourself in construction jobs. So it's really important that we get in the schools and engage, particularly with opportunities at hydrogen coming down the pike.
Definitely. Well, thank you, Tom. And Alan, if you have anything else to add on that, feel free. If not, I know we're at time.
No, that's fine. That's fine. Okay.
All right.
Good comments there. And I will just say this, and speaking from the university perspective, and it was kind of shown there in my next to last slide. Yeah, clearly our focus from the university side is very much in the sort of management professional type activities. But the reality is I live in a house. I'm glad I didn't build it. It would not be standing today. So we obviously have to respect the fact and not get sort of pig-headed about thinking somehow our thing is better. It's different. We need everyone. We need all of the trades involved. We need all of the skills involved to make this thing a success. And I think we all need to recognize that.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for your presentations, and thanks to everyone who's attended. This has been wonderful and really helped frame the conversation and next steps that states can take in thinking about these issues. So thank you all and have a great rest of your afternoon.
Thanks, Grace.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Thank you. Bye-bye.